The old cabin stood in ashes, its secrets thought to be lost forever. But when a police K-9 began circling the ruins again and again, refusing to leave, officers knew something was hidden. Every step uncovered clues no one expected, until the final discovery stunned the entire town. The question is, what was inside the burned cabin that left everyone speechless? The air around the cabin still carried the bitter sting of smoke, even though the flames had been extinguished days ago. Charred wood stood like blackened bones against the backdrop of pine trees, their tops swaying gently in the September wind. The small town had gathered around the perimeter tape, whispering about what had caused such destruction. Fire investigators had combed through the scene, marking their reports and shaking their heads at what they found. Nothing but ash, collapsed beams, and silence. But the silence broke when the K-9 unit arrived. The German Shepherd, trained for search and recovery, moved differently than the officers had expected. Instead of rushing into the ruins, his paws padded carefully around the edge of the scorched cabin, his head lowered, ears rigid, tail stiff, as if he was drawn to something invisible beneath the debris. He circled the structure once, then twice, then a third time. Each loop was tighter, more urgent, as though he was marking an invisible trail no human could see. The officers exchanged uncertain looks. They had cleared the site days ago and had found nothing unusual. No signs of survivors, no indication of foul play, at least nothing their eyes could see. But the dog was restless, refusing to break away from the ruins. He stopped suddenly, his body locked in tension, nose pointing to a collapsed section near what had once been the cabin's back wall. His handler tugged gently at the lead, but the K-9 resisted, eyes fixed on the rubble. The town had been restless since the fire. Whispers about whether it had been an accident or deliberate spread like dry brush catching flame. Some believed the cabin had been empty, abandoned years ago. Others muttered about strange lights seen near the woods the night before the fire. But none of the rumors could explain why the dog now circled endlessly, as if guarding a truth that no one else was ready to uncover. A faint chill passed through the scene as the dog began pawing at the blackened soil. The ground was layered in ash and soot, soft and unstable, but his persistence cut through the uncertainty. Each scrape of his claws seemed to dig deeper into the mystery. The officers hesitated before stepping closer, their boots crunching on burnt wood and glass. The air grew heavier as if the ruins themselves resisted the intrusion. The handler finally allowed the K-9 to work freely, and the animal pushed forward with instinctive determination. His nose dipped into the soil, pressing against the hidden story buried beneath. The officers crouched, brushing aside the ash, revealing a corner of something not charred completely. A faint glimmer of metal caught the light, buried within the dark rubble. But before they could reach for it, the dog circled again, barking once sharp, piercing, and unrelenting. His gaze shifted from the exposed metal to another section of the cabin, where the walls had collapsed inward. It was as though he was pointing to two pieces of a puzzle, fragments that only made sense when connected together. The officers pulled back for now, noting the discovery but unsettled by its implications. Why would the dog direct them to two separate points? Why circle instead of dig? It was as though he was showing them a pattern, a trail left behind not by fire, but by something or someone that had been here. As evening crept in, the cabin cast long shadows across the field. The crowd dispersed, but the dog refused to leave. His handler stayed with him, watching as he lay near the ruins, eyes locked on the burned shell of the home. The animal's loyalty to the unspoken mystery was unwavering. Something inside still mattered, something alive even if hidden. In the days that followed, the investigation intensified. The burned cabin was cordoned off more securely, and specialists arrived to study what the K-9 had indicated. The first glimmer of metal was recovered and revealed to be a locked fireproof box, scorched at the edges but intact. Inside, papers and documents were found, though many were water-damaged from firefighting efforts. They spoke of property ownership, but one name repeated itself across the charred fragments, a name no one in the town recognized, Still, the mystery deepened. The second spot the dog had indicated was harder to reach beneath heavy beams and unstable rubble. It required careful removal, but when cleared it revealed something far more haunting, a small, untouched space beneath the collapsed structure, almost like a hidden crawl space. Its walls, though blackened, were sturdy, designed to withstand collapse. The dog barked furiously at its entrance. When the investigators opened the narrow space, they were met with the unmistakable sight of personal belongings, clothes, small trinkets, and even a child's toy untouched by the flames. The ash had spared this corner, leaving behind whispers of a life once lived. But whose life and why hidden here, no one could yet answer. The town's curiosity erupted into fear. Had someone been living in the cabin secretly? Were they still alive, or had they perished in the fire? And if they had survived, why had they left behind such personal traces? The K-9 became the centerpiece of the investigation. His refusal to step away from the site, his insistent circling, and his precise focus on the hidden areas painted a story that words could not. To the officers, it was clear he had sensed something beyond human detection. And now, with each layer of discovery, the mystery only grew. The town gathered again, standing behind the yellow tape, watching as the investigators carried out items from the crawl space. Each piece pulled from the shadows added weight to the question, hovering over everyone's thoughts. What exactly had happened inside that burned cabin? And more importantly, why did the dog seem convinced that they had not yet reached the heart of it? The night settled once again, the ruins cloaked in darkness, but the K-9 did not rest. His eyes glimmered in the dim light, body alert, breath steady. He circled once more, pausing at the threshold of the crawl space, as though waiting for someone or something to emerge. The town went to sleep with unanswered questions, but the dog remained awake with an answer he could not yet give. The burned cabin was no ordinary ruin. It was a place where secrets still lived beneath the ash. And it was only the beginning. The burned cabin did not rest quietly. Even after the initial discoveries, the locked fireproof box and the crawl space with untouched belongings, the sense of unease grew heavier around the ruins. The K-9 had become a living compass, refusing to walk away, his movements circling the remains with a precision that no one could ignore. Each time he paced, his gaze lingered not only on the collapsed wood and stone, but on the forest that stretched beyond. It was as if the fire had not only consumed a cabin, but had burned a hole in the town's certainty. The documents recovered from the fireproof box were sent for analysis. Most of the writing was blurred, but fragments remained legible. Among them was a repeated name, Daniel Crosswell. The townspeople whispered that no one by that name had ever lived among them. Property records confirmed the cabin had been abandoned for years, yet the personal belongings in the crawl space suggested otherwise. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. The K-9 circled again, nose pressing into the soil at intervals, as if tracking something invisible. His circling no longer felt like random pacing. It felt like mapping, a pattern of movement that traced boundaries of what was hidden beneath. He scratched again at the base of the ruined foundation, his paws dislodging clumps of ash. The officers moved closer, pulling aside heavier debris to reveal that the crawl space extended further than they first believed. It was not simply a crawl space, it was a hidden room. The beams above had collapsed in such a way that they shielded the small chamber from the flames. Its walls, reinforced with stone, gave away the intention it had been built as a secret refuge. Inside were shelves lined with jars and containers, some shattered, others intact, and a stack of notebooks sealed in plastic. Dust and soot clung to everything, but the core remained untouched by fire. The dog barked sharply as the officers lifted the notebooks. The town watched as the items were placed carefully into evidence bags, carried out from the ruins like relics from a tomb. Suspense thickened. What could be so important that it had to be hidden beneath a cabin, sealed away in near secrecy? When investigators opened the notebooks later that night, the town's whispers grew louder. Each page told fragments of a life lived in solitude, entries about survival, about watching the town from a distance, about distrust of outsiders. Most chilling were the entries marked in recent handwriting, proof that someone had been living there not long ago, but if that person had been inside during the fire, why had no remains been found? The canine seemed restless with the unanswered question. His eyes darted toward the woods beyond the cabin, tail stiff, body leaning forward with unspent energy. His instincts pressed beyond the ruins, as though the trail he sought did not end at the burned cabin. Each bark echoed with urgency, pulling attention toward the tree line. Search teams expanded their perimeter. Flashlights cut through the dark forest, tracing paths between pines and fallen branches. The dog led the way, his movements deliberate, pulling handlers deeper into the woods. The townspeople, though hesitant, stayed near the edge, drawn by the pull of unanswered mystery. Half a mile into the woods, the canine halted. His nose pressed into the earth, circling again before pawing at a patch of disturbed soil. The ground was softer here, as if recently overturned. Officers dug carefully, each shovel breaking the silence until a metallic clang stopped them cold. A rusted tin box emerged, sealed tight. Inside, under layers of wrapped cloth, were photographs, some old, some recent. The older ones showed the cabin as it had once been, intact and lived in, with figures standing proudly on its porch. The newer ones revealed the cabin in its abandoned state. Photographs taken from angles that matched the surrounding woods. Whoever had taken them had been watching the property closely. The photographs were unsettling, but one detail stood out above all. In several of the newer images, a child's toy appeared, the same toy later found in the crawl space. The dog circling suddenly felt less like confusion and more like insistence. He had been pulling their attention toward what was missing. The question spread quickly among the townspeople. Was someone hiding, someone who had survived both the cabin's abandonment and its burning? The search widened. Days stretched with no sign of the mysterious occupant, yet the dog never faltered. He returned to the ruins each morning, circling the burned foundation, pressing his nose to the crawl space, as though waiting for someone to return. His handler noticed that every time dusk fell, the canine's attention shifted to the woods again. Then came the break. A hunter reported seeing movement near an abandoned trail, a figure slipping between trees with the quickness of someone accustomed to the shadows. Teams mobilized, the canine at the front, his ears pricked and nose alive with scent. The trail wound deep into the forest, past rocky outcrops and old hunting blinds. The dog pulled harder at the leash, his movements sharp with purpose. At last they reached a clearing where the remains of a makeshift shelter stood. It was crude, built from tarps and branches, yet signs of recent use were undeniable. A fire pit smoldered faintly, fresh ashes scattered with footprints around it. Among the belongings left behind were more of the same notebooks, half-filled pages scribbled with accounts of isolation, fear of discovery, and a plea that no one would ever find them. But no person was there. Only traces, only fragments. The canine sniffed intently at the edges of the clearing, circling the fire pit as if replaying the moments of whoever had been there. His paws led to a small trail, nearly invisible but fresh enough to show signs of movement. The dog barked once, piercing the forest silence, signaling that the search was far from over. Back in town, the unease reached its peak. Whispers turned into debates. Who had been living in secrecy? Why did they vanish after the fire? And most pressing of all, what connection did they have to the cabin and to the name scrawled across those burned papers? The dog had become more than an investigator's tool. To the town, he was the keeper of the mystery, the one being who refused to let the truth be buried in ash and shadows. His circling was no longer seen as odd, it was seen as relentless loyalty to uncovering a secret that still pulsed beneath the ruins. And with each step he took, it became clearer. The mystery was not about what the fire destroyed, but about what it failed to erase. The burned cabin had not only hidden a secret life, it had shielded a story the town was never meant to see, and the dog was determined to finish telling it. The town no longer treated the burned cabin as a ruin. It had become a place of pilgrimage. Each morning, people gathered near the caution tape, waiting for updates, watching the canine with a quiet awe. He circled the ruins with the same persistence, his movements patient and steady, as if guarding an invisible thread of truth. Investigators pressed forward with the trail the dog had led them to in the forest. The makeshift shelter had been hastily abandoned, its belongings left behind in panic. More notebooks recovered from the site painted a fuller picture of the mysterious occupant. The writings described long years of hiding, of watching the world from afar, and most tellingly, of someone carrying a burden too heavy to share. The handwriting grew more frantic in the final entries. One page trembled with words that spoke of fear of being discovered, fear that the fire had destroyed not only the cabin, but the last hope of remaining unseen. Yet between the panic lay something else, a name repeated carefully. Eleanor Crosswell. The town froze. The surname matched the one recovered from the fireproof box. Daniel Crosswell, Eleanor Crosswell. A link, finally clear. The cabin was not just a hiding place, it was a home that had belonged to the Crosswells, though no one in town remembered them. Rumors now swirled with sharper edges. Had the Crosswells fled from something? Had they erased themselves from public life? And most urgent, was Eleanor still alive? The canine seemed to answer before anyone could. He pulled his handler to the edge of the forest trail again, nose low, tail stiff, every muscle in his body radiating urgency. The search party followed. His steps were no longer circling but direct, cutting through the woods with the precision of an arrow. Hours later, he led them to a shallow ravine where a stream cut through the trees. At first it seemed empty, but then the dog froze, ears upright, nose twitching with unmistakable certainty. He barked once, sharp and commanding. The searchers spread out, scanning the thicket of brush along the bank. And there she was. A woman, frail and trembling, crouched low as if the earth itself might swallow her. Her clothes were soot-stained, her hands clutched tightly around a small bundle wrapped in a weathered blanket. Her eyes widened in terror as the lights from the searchers landed on her, but the canine approached first, slow, deliberate, non-threatening. His body language softened, his circle finally complete, as he lowered himself to the ground before her. The woman's expression shifted, the fear dissolving into recognition. She whispered something no one could hear, but her hand slowly extended to touch the dog's head. The canine leaned into her touch, a bond forming instantly, as if he had been searching only for her all along. The officers stepped closer, carefully, discovering that the bundle she clutched was not just belongings, it was a child. A young girl no older than 6, her face streaked with soot but her eyes wide and alive. She pressed her small hand into the dog's fur, holding on as though he were the only anchor she had in the world. The town erupted with questions when the pair were brought back. Who was Eleanor Crosswell, and why had she hidden for so long? Why was there a child, and why had they been living in secrecy beneath the cabin and in the woods? The answers came slowly, pieced together through the notebooks and Eleanor's quiet confessions once she was safe. Years ago, she and her brother Daniel had retreated to the cabin after a tragedy that had fractured their family. Fear of the outside world consumed them, and isolation became their way of life. Daniel had built the hidden chamber beneath the cabin, a place he thought would protect them from discovery. But time moved on. Daniel passed years earlier, leaving Eleanor alone with the responsibility of raising her daughter, unseen by the town, hidden in the woods. She survived through careful foraging, old supplies, and sheer determination. The fire that consumed the cabin had not been set deliberately. It was an accident from a cooking fire left unattended. Eleanor had fled into the forest with her daughter, too afraid to reveal herself, believing the world would never accept her. The dog's circling had been no accident. He had picked up the faint scent of survivors, of belongings too fresh to belong to an abandoned home. His endless loops around the ruins were not just instinct, they were insistence, a demand that the truth not be left buried. The town listened, stunned into silence. The mystery that had haunted them had a face now, and it was not one of danger but of survival. In the weeks that followed, the town's fear turned into compassion. They offered Eleanor and her daughter food, clothing, and a place to stay. The girl, who had never walked openly through the streets, laughed for the first time in the presence of others, clutching the dog's fur as he trotted proudly beside her. The canine had not just uncovered a mystery, he had reunited a family with a community they never thought they could trust again. The burned cabin stood as a scar in the woods, but no longer as a place of fear. It became a marker of resilience, a reminder that even in ashes, life and hope can be found. The town spoke of rebuilding not the cabin itself, but a memorial, a place to honor the strength of those who survived and the dog who refused to let the truth remain hidden. On the day the town gathered for the dedication, the canine sat proudly at the center, his eyes calm, his tail sweeping the ground in quiet satisfaction. Eleanor stood beside him, her daughter in her arms, both of them no longer shadows in the forest, but part of the town once more. The mystery had ended not with fear, but with connection. The circle the dog had drawn was finally closed, not around ruins, but around people, binding them together in ways no one had expected. And as the crowd dispersed, the dog rose, nose lifted to the air. His work was done. He had found what was hidden, uncovered what was lost, and in doing so had given back not just answers, but hope. The burned cabin no longer spoke of tragedy, it spoke of survival, and it spoke most clearly through the one who had circled it without rest, the canine whose loyalty uncovered not just secrets, but life itself. If you felt the chills from this story, just imagine the ones you'll miss if you're not subscribed. New mysteries, new canine heroes, and twists you won't see coming are waiting for you here. Hit that like button, join the family, and don't miss the next story before it disappears from your feed.